Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Police photoshopped Tyrone Allen's mugshot for a lineup. He's not the only one, though. According to the New York Times, court records and interviews with police departments across the country show this was not an isolated episode of officers brushing aside a discrepancy. Some of the nation's largest police departments regularly use Photoshop and other editing tools in cases where suspects have a distinguishing tattoo, scar, bruise, or other mark. Should law enforcement agencies ever Photoshop lineup photos? Keyword there is ever, okay? So everybody's probably already got there right. Oh, you're bashing on police, or departments need this and it's very valuable. I know you're probably coming into this with all kinds of thoughts already, but just everybody hold off. There's some nuance here we're going to get into, but we can't start to talk about nuance without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
How are we doing today? So we decide, yeah.
I'm good.
All right. You're okay after I showed you this article from the New York Times?
I wasn't at first. And that's why I brought that up, Lance, because I think I kind of had is visceral fair? A visceral reaction to this headline. The headline in the...
I told you to read the whole thing, and you read the first paragraph, and you're like, oh, no. I said, would you please continue to read?
Because, right, it's a catchy, and I'm sure most of you who see the title of this episode, if you're listening where you can see that, police photoshopped his mugshot for a lineup. He's not the only one. That's what the New York Times had as the headline for this. And this is an inside piece, Sunday edition, 24th page. Okay, so this is not front and center. And it definitely, I'm glad Lance found it, because I think this is something that I asked before why you should care, and I guess I didn't answer it. Aside from everybody having their input, I think this goes right to the heart and soul, Lance, of our democracy, right? Where is the line that law enforcement can cross when attempting to do their job by going after criminals, right? I mean, that's...
And it's got technology in there.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about photoshopping pictures. It's interesting, a very interesting piece, and I look forward to talking about it here today.
So there's a couple different angles. We'll start with kind of the initial simplistic explanation. The article continues as follows. Criminal justice experts say there can be good reasons for touching up photos. For instance, adding a suspect's birthmark to pictures of other people in the array, known as fillers, can make lineups fairer by ensuring that the perpetrator does not stand out. Modifying the features of the suspect, however, is less common and has concerned lawyers who say investigators are encouraging positive identifications and changing the appearance of the person they are asking witnesses to identify. So just to be real clear on that, there's kind of two different versions of this, okay? And the nuance here really is important because there's a very significant difference, right? Version A, according to the Justice Department, right, the Federal Department of Justice, the following is okay. We have a suspect, Lance. They've got a bunch of tattoos, right, on their face. You can come up with all these filler photos that aren't the guilty person, right? You get them from a stock image library.
Right.
And you can add tattoos to their face. That way the person doesn't stand out just because they have tattoos. Okay?
Exactly.
So Justice Department says that's kosher. What the Justice Department says is not kosher is, quote, should not alter the suspect's photo. So this is scenario B, where you've got all these filler photos and you don't change them. Rather, you change the suspect by removing their facial tattoos. And this is just an example, the facial tattoos thing. It could be anything, a birthmark, right, a mole, whatever. Something that's a distinguishing feature that's going to really stand out. So rather than adjust the filler photos, you actually change the suspect's photo. And this isn't a hypothetical, guys. Just to be clear, this is really happening in different police departments across the nation. Many of them note, and I think this is also very important to put in there. For example, New York Police Department, okay, NYPD. They tell us, Lance, that the situation in their case is this is only as a last resort. In other words, they make every attempt to find organic filler photos, unedited, that closely look like the real suspect.
Right.
So this is the nuance I was talking about before, right? Because these are different. And maybe you're just again it altogether, right? I don't like it and I don't want it. No messing with anything. But at the same time, then I think you still have to talk about the filler photo thing. Do you try to find filler photos that look like the suspect? Well, that's just been common police practice for ever since they started doing photo lineups, right? I mean, the goal is that you don't want a lineup of people that look vastly different from one another, because then it's more likely that people are going to pick someone based on their own biases rather than on who they think actually looks like the perpetrator.
Well, and I'm not trying to give even more away here, but I, like you, when I first saw it, said, oh my gosh, here we are. We're railroading people, trying to find criminals, trying to clear cases. But as I read the article, which is, again, why we say, please listen to the whole show, the prosecutors in this case, though, had a nice point, I thought, as well. And that is,
right,
the suspect could have used makeup to cover up the tattoos, because if you go online, and check out the article, which we have up for you, you can see kind of like
where do people go, Lance?
I don't know.
Thestateofus.org.
Okay. Thestateofus.org. That's where they go. They know, they listen.
They know. They know things. They hear things.
Yeah, they know. They're smart.
Thestateofus.org.
I go to my device here.
Okay.
What's my device called?
A Surface.
Sir, I got a Surface. I go to the Surface.
I go to the Surface.
Like I'm on the moon. But if you look at it, it's almost like, to me, when I thought of it, I thought of a post-tattooed facial of Mike Tyson. Okay. Whereas thinking of somebody out there that maybe a lot of our listeners know, or that you could, look up very quickly. But the tattoos are like a very identifying part of this suspect's face.
Right.
And so the prosecution said, well, maybe before he decided to go in and do the crime,
he was smart enough
to cover that up, because he would have been easy to pick out. And I'm like, that's a logical argument.
Because then,
I'm anti-picture. All of this, technology and stuff. Anyway, I kind of like.
But if you're getting robbed,
well, if I'm the criminal, if I'm the suspect, or if I was thinking of doing a crime, and I had a
big face tattoo,
that's an intelligent criminal.
Decision. Right. I mean,
because then, hey, they're looking for a clean faced person, and I've taken makeup and covered it all. I've covered up my tattoo. So now when they bring me in, I'm like, look, I've got a big tattoo. I couldn't be the guy that you're looking for, because you're looking for somebody with a clean face. And I've had this tattoo since 1975. So, therefore I'm not your person. So, I'm not saying this is still a good thing, but that was a logical argument by the prosecution.
Because we can sit here and look at these photos, right? And we can say, oh, well, obviously somebody would notice if this guy had all these tattoos. But if he had done something like use makeup to cover them up, which is not, it's not like that's a real specialty thing. That wouldn't be that complicated.
Sure.
You're asking people, right? So just say a bank's getting robbed. This guy typically has face tattoos, but he's covering them up. You're the teller and you're getting robbed, right? Tensions are high anyway. So, and this goes to a whole other thing that we can talk about, which even is just the reliability of eyewitness accounts, which I took a criminal justice class, where we looked into that and the stats, and some of that is frightening.
It is, right.
It's not good all by itself. And the reason I bring that up is not to say that we should totally discredit eyewitness accounts, but the whole point is it's not reliable anyway. You're in a high stress situation like this and somebody's used makeup to cover up. The likelihood that you're going to notice that they've used makeup to conceal something is really minor. the chances of that are almost non-existent.
That happens.
Right. You're not focused on, oh, gee, is this person wearing makeup? And even if you did, maybe, that came to mind, you're looking at all these lineup photos and you see this guy with all these face tattoos. You're probably not going to make that immediate connection. So there's definitely an argument, right? At least is what we're trying to acknowledge on the side of the prosecution saying, well, look, guys, it would be a lot harder to prosecute people if we think that they actually used makeup or something else to conceal facial features. That's going to make it really difficult to ever get anybody to ID our suspect, which is part of what, again, for better or for worse, and we'll talk about that later in the show, for better or for worse, that is part, right, of how you prove somebody is guilty. If you're the prosecution and you can find somebody who says that's the person, that's a big help. So,
well, and you throw that, just a quick question, before we go to break here, is it any different than when the defense attorney dresses up the suspect to go to court?
Right. Puts them in a nice suit and tie, and they've never worn one before in their life.
And shave and get a haircut. I don't, just throwing that out there. I don't know.
That's a good point.
I didn't think that one through. So,
but that's the other side of it. Is that fair? If that's not what they typically wear, is it fair then for the defense to paint them in a different light? And that's the whole argument, right, of court. And that's what we're going to keep looking at. But before we go on, because we're ultimately going to try to answer the question, should law enforcement ever Photoshop lineup images? That's what we're going to try to answer. But before we do that, we're going to take just a moment, because Lance already referenced it once, but we think it's important that we have this resource out there, thestateofus.org. It's our website. And the nice thing is, in addition to being able to listen there, you can also pull up the article that we're referencing. And our producer, Caleb Spinner, he brought up a good point, and we'll let him speak to it here after the break. He brought up a good point that when you look at the color images here, Lance, he said he thought they were different guys.
Right.
I mean, the change was substantial enough that they no longer even look like the same person. Now, that's just one account, okay? And this is just one example. But the point is that it's important for you to look at what we're referencing and read it through yourself, because Lance and I both had a reaction, and you had a reaction probably when you saw the title or heard our introduction to the show of, oh my gosh, police are doing what now? They're photoshopping images. But you got to give it a minute to marinate. And that's part of what we're trying to do here at the State of Us, right, Lance?
That's exactly right. We're trying to just bring up different sides to things and talk around all the sides of the issue, not just pick one side or the other.
And hopefully we'll get you an answer before the show's out. So you have to keep listening, and we'll be right back after a quick word from one of our sponsors. Welcome back. We've been discussing police departments that Photoshop mugshots for lineup photos. That's right. Police departments that alter a suspect's image in order to make it look more like the eyewitness accounts. Now, that's a matter of perspective, and that's part of what we've been discussing, is the nuance of the situation here. And we're going to keep going with this conversation. But before we do, Lance, I think it's important that we talk to people about the frame of reference for how we approach conversations. And that ties back into TrueChat's mission. What is that?
Well, our mission statement is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
So that means that we look at this, we try to keep an open mind, right? We can't do it perfectly, because we read the headline and we all come in with a bias. And I think so far we've discussed a little bit of it. But the nuance doesn't end at what we've discussed so far. It continues with the following. Experts generally agree that finding filler photos with similar identifiable markings is the ideal solution. Although a 2004 survey of 220 police departments, including many of the nation's largest, found that nearly a third of those police departments did not do anything about unique markings. According to a training manual issued by the Justice Department in 2003, when a suspect has a unique feature that a witness did not mention seeing, the police should add it to the filler photos but should not alter the suspect's photo. In these circumstances, the Miami-Dade Police Department takes a novel approach. Detectives use Adobe Photoshop to add the suspect's tattoo or scar to 2 of the 5 filler photographs. creating an array in which half of the photos have the feature and half do not. So what that means is we've got 5 photos, right, Lance?
Right.
One of them is the suspect. 2 of the filler photos we have altered to make look more like the suspect. 2 of them are unaltered and are generally similar to the suspect, naturally speaking. That's kind of different.
It is.
Because this is kind of a hybrid approach of, well, we don't want to alter the suspect, and we're not going to alter all of the filler photos. One of the things that's, I think, important to take into account that the article mentions is that in a study published in 2016, researchers in the United States and England asked witnesses to watch someone with a distinctive feature commit a crime. The researchers then produced a photo array of people who committed the crime. What they found is that, in essence, the unfair lineup made people more likely to confuse the guilty perpetrator with an innocent suspect. So what they did is they take a video and they show somebody who's got something like a face tattoo, okay? And then they provide an array of photos which don't include that same person, but includes one person with a face tattoo. And they were far and away more likely to select the person with the face tattoo than anybody else. Now, that's not all that surprising, right?
No, it's human nature, right?
Because you find somebody who's got a distinctive feature, and then you see somebody else who's got a similar distinctive feature, and it's, oh, well, that must be the guy. Because I remember they had this mole on the tip of their nose. You know, this other guy's got a mole on the tip of his nose, so that must be the same one because nobody else has that mole on the tip of their nose. The problem here, Lance, is part of what I learned is that police don't often regularly inform people. Now, this may not be the case anymore. This was several years ago when I took this criminal justice class, so it may have changed, in fairness to police departments everywhere. They don't always inform people that the perpetrator may not even be in the lineup at all, because they do that too. They produce a lineup, right? Show it to you on one day. It's got a minute. Then on another day, they do it and they're not in it at all.
Right.
And people typically feel, well, I'm being shown a lineup, so they must be here. So they feel forced to choose one. So I guess we put that in there too, to take that into account.
That's true. But the whole point of this is that there are a lot of different things that have been done in the past and that are being done today. There isn't one, you've cited the Justice Department a couple of times, but everything's a recommendation and every department handles this differently. And I guess as we look at this, that's really what bothers me more than anything, because I can see the arguments on both sides.
There's no uniformity,
though. Not at all. There's no standard operating procedure here as to what to do, which means that depending on whether or not you look like a suspect determines how you're going to be treated in the United States in the legal system. And that's what bothers me the most, is that wherever, if I were to be arrested, they're going to do different things to me. And that's the biggest thing here. And I don't want to jump into the final part of this show with answers, but there are some people in here, with typically, a more liberal viewpoint who say it's never a good idea to do this. And it
frustrates me that that's the more liberal viewpoint.
Right. Well,
because to me, that should be the more conservative.
I'm assuming
we're going to get into the solution,
but you have obviously the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union in Oregon quoted here. And now this doesn't necessarily mean anything, because you can be a criminal justice professor and take a conservative viewpoint.
Sure.
But in this article, they're both quoted as saying this should never be done. And I'm thinking, whoa, I'm not sure, if I'm a suspect and I've got this big birthmark and then there are 4 other people standing in line and none of them have the birthmark that I do, I'm not sure I'm getting a fair shake.
Right.
So,
because it's not just about proving that somebody's guilty. It's also about proving that people are innocent.
They're innocent. And like you talk about, there's no eyewitness. Everybody's, well, I saw it. It's, my dad, the first time I was in his class, in college, and it was a creative writing class. But what he did is he walked in And nobody knew him. I mean, I knew it was my dad, but they didn't know it was Professor Jackson. He walked into the room with a hammer, picked up a vase that was sitting on the podium, picked the vase up, smashed it with the hammer, threw it in the corner, walked out, turned around, came back into the room and said, okay, everybody write down what you just saw. And then we read that. We all read. Some had, tall, short, skinny, fat. I mean, we all, because it was just like, we were all just, oh my gosh, this guy just, that we don't know, walks in.
Because you're not expecting
he breaks a vase and then he just walked out. If we had all been eyewitnesses to a crime, there would have been 12 different suspects that the police would have had to have checked out. And that was his point when we, his point was, talking about the human eye and what we watch and what we take in and how then when we're scared and our emotions or whatever take over and changes and filters how we see things.
Right.
So it's a tough situation anyway. And then to not, I don't know, it's
to never ever do it. And that's part of what we're looking at is, are there situations? Is there a way to do it?
Because at first I would have said, yes, you should never do that.
Right.
It's automatic. Well, duh, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
You don't do this.
You don't want police photoshopping pictures.
Right. Oh, so we've got 6 reports that they look this way. Okay, we're going to make you look like this guy because then it's going to be easier to convict you.
Well, when you say it like that's the point.
But
it makes
that's
it
the
sound
thing that
ridiculous.
comes in. But that's the thing that comes to mind, in my mind anyway. That's what came into my mind when I saw the headline, which is then when I read the article, I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. This made me stop and think, which is why I thought it would be a good article for the show because, well, maybe I'm not to give it away, but it made me stop and think. And I think that's a good thing for us to do. I think too many times we react and we don't stop and think.
Right. We don't take time to analyze.
Right.
So we've already talked about, a few different ways and a few different protocols. Here's one more way. I'm going to give you one more way because we're about to move into the part where we talk about the solution. What do we do about this, right? What should the standard operating procedure be? And that's difficult because there's a lot of different ways it's done. Let's talk about in-person lineups real quick. Okay. So most police departments, if you're bringing in the real humans, right? We're not doing photos. We're bringing them in to the police station.
I'm not looking at the mug book. I'm looking at,
right.
Okay.
They've got these distinguishing features, tattoos, moles, birthmark, whatever. Okay. What they do in person is they have them put Band-Aids over this. Everybody puts a Band-Aid in the same spot.
Yep.
Okay. So they don't add, right? They don't come in with a makeup thing and add a mole to everybody. They don't even show the distinguishing mark. They cover it up on everybody.
Right.
Okay. A police department, let's see, where is this one? It's Sally Q. Yates, who was the deputy attorney general.
Miami-Dade Police Department.
Yeah, it's Miami-Dade. What they do is they take and cover up with black boxes in the photos, kind of like a Band-Aid. In other words, it's very obvious that something is being covered. They're not showing you or telling you what's being covered, and they cover the same place on all of the photos. So you're not changing these marks. You're just knowingly covering them. That way, Lance has this big old, wing tattooed on his forehead. He's got a big old Band-Aid over it. I know something's covered, right? I don't know that it's a big old wing. Right. Everybody's got that Band-Aid on. Maybe Caleb's got it on too. I don't know that he has something or that he doesn't, but I know that somebody, right, has something there.
Great. Now you've tipped people off that are looking for me.
That's right. Yeah, we've given him the cue. Look for Caleb Spinner. So we're going to bring Caleb in this last part because I want to get everybody's thoughts on what's the best approach here, because it is a little sticky, and I'm not sure that never ever is the right answer. I think too often in all of what we do, Lance, right, we are so quick to it's either or, right? It's one or the other. It can't ever be a compromise or some kind of merging of two solutions. And I'm not sure that always bodes well.
It sure seems that way today on most issues. And like I've said before, and I've told Caleb 100 times, is the young man is, I wish I could be that way. But the more I learn, the more I find out the more gray I see. Not just in the mirror,
Right.
but just in my thinking as well.
And that's okay. That's why we're here, though, right? That's why we do this program called The State of Us, because as much as I don't want to say it's about the gray, because I think it's about acknowledging the gray so that we can put something in black and white. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, we can explain that. I mean,
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Right. That's what we're trying to do anyway. And we want you to let us know if that's what we're getting done. You can get in touch with us on social media. Just search for The State of Us. And also on our website, thestateofus.org. We're going to continue and talk about our proposed solution. What would the three of us be comfortable with? Can Caleb, Justin, and Lance come to something that we all say, yeah, we feel good about that, or we feel good enough to say this is what we want all police departments to be doing? And then to find out, you'll have to stick around. We'll be right back in just a minute. Welcome back. Some police departments Photoshop mugshots to make a lineup what they would say is more realistic or more fair. The question is, where does that line begin and end? And the bigger problem that we've identified throughout the program today, I think, is that there is no standard procedure. Why is that a problem? We didn't talk about that really, Lance. I think the main issue, and you tell me if your take is different, the main issue with there not being a standard protocol is that now you run into this issue of the way that Lance is treated and the way that Justin is treated is different if we don't live in the same place.
That was my whole point that I kind of got into in the last segment, is that it just seems like, well, it depends on where you're a suspect as the treatment you're going to get. And that doesn't seem like
the type of country we're supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, I can see where it's different. You know, I mean, there are subtle differences. This doesn't seem like a subtle difference to me, you know, because there are places where, well, speeding's a lot more watched over, or arson maybe is a lot more watched. You know, you have a
higher rates of different crimes in different
right.
areas.
So, you know, you have a little more watchful police on in some areas by certain police departments over others. I get that. This seems though like this should be a pretty cut and dry thing. Is okay. We're going to do it in this situation. We're never going to do it. We're going to do it all the time. This should be something that could be easily applied,
standardized
to any police department. Yeah. And this is the rule of law we're going to follow.
So what we're going to do now is talk about what each of us would be comfortable with. And it's okay to agree with one another, but we're going to hold any criticism of one another's decisions until after we've each said what we have to say. That way, hopefully we get through. You know, we have limited time. So, and per our tradition, we'll start with none other than Caleb Spinner.
Well, we mentioned
Do you like leading off? Is that?
I'm fine. As we've discussed in the past 24 minutes, there's a lot of gray here. There's a lot of times where you could look at it on one side and go, yeah, it's great here. And then other times where you're like, well, wait a minute, it's not necessarily the best idea here. I think it's best to balance the two. Honestly, I'm not sure exactly what form that takes, but I can see the consequences of misidentifying somebody, but I can also see where the ingenuity of, as we discussed, covering birthmarks with makeup or covering face tattoos with makeup, I can see where you'd need to account for something like that. Now, that being said, looking at the pictures, as I did earlier, they look like two completely different guys. It looks like the picture on the right, added hair and the beard is thicker, as well as a lighter skin tone applied to the actual face. So to that extent, no, but I do get where they're coming from with removing facial marks or adding them to the other people.
So what is your proposed standard operating procedure? All police departments may do X and they may not do Y.
They may add to the other people
the filler photos.
Add to the filler photos, but they may not change the other image, the suspect image.
Okay. So Caleb is, you can do whatever you want to filler photos, but you cannot change the suspect image. So we can Photoshop the heck out of them, the filler photos that we know aren't the person who's a suspect. Lance. but nothing other than that, right? So none of this black box nonsense, no Band-Aids, obviously no altering the original suspect's image.
Right. And I guess the other thing I'd put in is it has to at least resemble the original person. You can't like remove my ear and make my eyes wider than they usually are. You know, you should at least be able to.
You want the police to start with filler photos that are at least in the neighborhood of the suspect.
Yes.
So in other words, we don't take Lance and make him look like Caleb.
Right.
Okay.
Because that's not fair to Lance.
Right.
You know, because then Lance could be guilty for something that I did.
Okay, Lance.
First of all, I think that when you're talking about a lineup, then you have to make them all look the same. The birthmark or the tattoo or the cut or whatever is there on the suspect either needs to be all covered up, like with everybody. If it's in line or you're looking at a mug shot, you know,
Visibly covered. So like a Band-Aid or a black box?
Somehow, in some way. And I don't care if it's photoshopped, but I mean, I think all of your suspects have to look the same, except I'm thinking now, it just popped in my head. If I'm looking at a mug book, you know, I'm looking at thousands of pictures and then it looks like whatever that person looked like. But if you've got suspects and you hand me a page with 6 pictures on it and say, okay, do any of these 6 look like somebody? Then they kind of, any mark should, because
it's tough.
It makes, but it makes sense though. The argument, but boy, I don't usually like, no offense here, because I've got some friends that are, but I usually don't like prosecutors. You know, I don't usually like, but the fact that you can alter what you look like before you go and commit a crime, then shouldn't you have the right, you know, as then the prosecution
to alter them again,
to make it altered and say, well, this is the person that, but then you're innocent until proven guilty. So I guess I can see sometimes when it has to be there, when it's, you know, that it's okay to do it. I do think though, like Caleb did point out, when you start to Photoshop too much, you start to then change the original look of the person.
Right.
Then that's when you have to stop. But I guess for a lineup, I think you need to take away those identifying marks unless those identifying marks are part of the eyewitness accounts.
So in other words, right, you're talking to people immediately following whatever was committed, and they are describing who they think it was. And they say he had a tattoo of a bald eagle on his forehead.
Right.
Then it's okay.
Or they had blonde hair.
Right. Then it's okay to leave
hair
it.
Or
right.
whatever. Then that stays.
Right. So it has to be nailed down.
If you have eyewitness
specific
accounts, which we've talked about how
right,
can they be valuable, but there's a consensus.
Okay.
You know, a gas station has been robbed or the person.
So your proposed solution is you can alter the suspect and the filler photos to make them all similar unless a specific identifying feature was brought up by one of the eyewitnesses.
Yes.
Okay. I thought I had it. So
that's that. I'm not strong, but that's where I am.
Okay. So we're going to get three different ideas here, which the question is, can we agree on one? I'm hoping that mine kind of, I don't want to say it merges yours too, because it doesn't exactly, but hopefully mitigates two sides of it. I would say that by default, the black box approach is what should be used. Okay. So in other words, but I like the piece that Lance added. So this speaks to Caleb's never alter the suspect's photo. In other words, in a way that isn't obvious that you altered it. Okay. So this is, you can't remove a tattoo. You can cover a tattoo and tell people the tattoo is covered. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the key here is the transparency in what you're doing to the suspect's photo. letting people know that, we may have altered photos so that there is a uniformity in the appearance of the suspects. Okay, that's different. But to not say that and to go into it and people not know that that's a possibility, that to me is where the big challenge comes in. So I say you take the black box / Band-Aid approach, which is to cover identifiable marks in the same location. So I'm the accused suspect. I got a mole on the tip of my nose. Okay. Lance is part of the lineup, and they're going to put a black box over the tip of my nose, and they're going to put a black box over the tip of his nose, even though he's got no mole there. The point is the uniformity in telling you there is something there, so that maybe if you remember an identifying mark, it can still jog your memory, but to not go so far as to show you and place the same mark on everybody, or to remove it from somebody altogether.
Okay.
I can see situations, though, where that's impractical. For example, this gentleman has face tattoos all across his forehead and down one cheek. So, you'd be talking about 2/3 of his face would be covered.
Mm-hmm.
Now now I can't identify anybody because I can't see half of the dude, right? So I could see where that would be a problem. And that's where I would defer back to in the case where an eyewitness specifically describes a distinguishing feature, like exactly what the tattoo was, right? Or exactly the type of hair. Maybe they had, skunk striped hair, okay? Big old white strip right through the center of black hair. Something that really stands out, that's a clearly identifiable, unique marking. Then I'm okay with saying we're going to make all the filler photos look like this, or we're going to remove the original marking from the suspect, depending on what's most practical, and be sure that we are transparent when telling people that something, in other words, you don't have to say we altered XYZ, but you do have to say, in order to make the lineup as realistic as possible, some of these photos we're not saying they have been, but we may have gone through and done Photoshop work on the original suspect or any of the other photos that are not suspects. That way people know going into it, if they're remembering, man, I think he had a tattoo, but I don't see anybody here with a tattoo. That way they at least have that, okay, I'm not crazy. He probably did have a tattoo and they removed it, or whatever. So that would be my solution. You go with black boxing by default when it's not practical, or when someone, identifies a very unique feature. That's when it comes into play where it's okay for them to go in and alter filler or suspect photos.
I can get with that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because and obviously it should be translated, because you don't want to say, "Oh, we found your child's killer." The parent goes nuts on him. Oh, by the way, that guy we made to look like him.
Right. Yeah. Oh, by the way, that was a filler photo. Yeah. So that's I guess the other side of it too, is there's sympathetic, right, Lance, to law enforcement and the very difficult job they have.
Right.
And they're out there trying to make sure the law is followed. And they have a very difficult job because in this country, it's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. They have the burden of proof. It's not supposed to be on Lance to prove that he didn't commit the crime. It's supposed to be on the prosecution to prove that he did commit the crime, right? Supposed to be. Now, whether or not it is that way is a whole different show. But I think in keeping with that, the innocent until proven guilty, we have to, unfortunately, I don't think it's unfortunate, I guess. We have to make sure that police are being relatively transparent with eyewitnesses on the process they're following so that eyewitnesses don't feel extra pressured to make a call that may not be right. Because we do wrongfully imprison people in this country a lot more frequently than we realize. And I think that we would all want to avoid that as much as possible. Because it's easy for Caleb to sit here today, right, and say, well, it's not a problem for me because I'm never going to be in a situation where I've done something that I could get accused of. But Caleb's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a blue-eyed, blonde-haired Catholic who's about 6 foot was seen robbing a gas station, and Caleb happened to be driving by, and the security camera caught him. Caleb didn't do anything wrong, but Caleb's now a suspect in that investigation.
Yep.
So it's always possible, right?
I just going to refer to, in closing, I'm going to refer to Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who said it is better for 10 guilty people to go free than it is for one innocent person to go to jail. And I'm kind of paraphrasing that, and there's a lot of different people, and it comes, it's got a long legal history, but the whole idea is we have to err on the side of safety and judgment here and make sure that we're not stepping on people's toes to the point that we're putting innocent people in jail. That's just my basic legalistic belief that I need to follow.
We, all three of us, right, can say criminals who are found guilty should be punished. Okay.
If somebody did a crime, I'm fine with punishing them. We can argue about the levels of punishment.
Yeah.
But I sure as heck don't want something to be in place that causes innocent people to be put in jail. Whether it was done on purpose or just it was an accident.
Yep.
When we need to make sure the system is as safe as possible for that not to happen.
Should law enforcement agencies ever Photoshop lineup images? I think all three of us has come to the consensus that there are situations in which it would be acceptable to do so. But we want very specific parameters on when it is okay to do that. Let us know your thoughts at TrueChat.org on social media, at TrueChat.org. And of course, thestateofus.org. We've got links to social media there, as well as all the different ways to listen. And we've challenged people to bring us, Lance, additional listeners, right?
That is right.
To say this whole thing that we're doing, this whole experiment in free spirit thinking, which you could say is what the State of Us is kind of about. This whole experiment doesn't work if we don't have lots of people involved and engaged in sharing their viewpoints. So if you're going to challenge somebody to tune in, you need to know a few different ways that you can invite them to listen. And what are those ways, Lance?
Well, you can go to Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else fine podcasts are found.
Please join the conversation. It gets better when you're part of it. For the State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
And I'm Caleb Spinner.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.